Here's a good example of what the public, or was kept from the public. You know, most of the stuff that happened during the Cold War, by the way, is still reclassified for 50 years. Pierre Trudeau, what a character this guy was. He was an ardent communist. Not just a sympathizer or fellow traveler. Ardent communist. He led the Comintern, the Young Communist Party for Canada, over to the Comintern meeting in Moscow in 1952. During World War II, he went up and down the docks at Halifax on a motorcycle with a German helmet on, yelling at all the troops embarking to go off and fight the Germans, because at that time, you see, Moscow and Germany had an alliance to fight together. Of course, he threw away the helmet as soon as he was ordered to, and was against Germany once Germany and Stalin fell out. But he eventually became Prime Minister of Canada. And he altered totally the face of Canada for internationalism. Just like Mr. Brown did the same thing and Mr. Blair did the same thing in Britain. And Pierre Trudeau reclassified a document that was written and put under Official Secrets Act in 1947, I think it was, for 30-odd years. On his last day of being in office, he reclassified it for another 30 to 50 years. What was that list? It was a list of all the communist members from the first defector from the Soviet Union. Of all the guys who were working in the Canadian and American bureaucracies. Hundreds of them. Reclassified that again from the public. We're not supposed to know. Why? Because you see, they take care of their own. That's why. It was already communist back then. And their offspring are now working in the same jobs, and governments too. Here's what happened in Britain. Now, David Kelly was a top scientist who spoke out against Blair going into Iraq. He said it was all baloney. There was no weapons of mass destruction. David Kelly also was a scientist who worked with Israel on ethnic-specific diseases, viruses, for warfare purposes. This is a very important guy. He worked for the British government in collusion with Israel for future wars. And here's an article here. He was murdered. Before he was going up to a high court inquiry to expose this stuff, he was found dead. And everybody took the official version, oh, he committed suicide, even though his wife said it was baloney. Even though he said 2 days before, they'll find me in the forest with my arms slit. And the official version came out, and a bunch of doctors got together and demanded a second autopsy. And they got it, and said this guy was murdered. Well, guess what? This is from the Mail Online, and it's from January 2010, 23rd. David Kelly, post-mortem, that's autopsy, to be kept secret for 70 years. This is your freedom and democracy. It says, as doctors accuse Lord Hutton of concealing vital information. Vital evidence which could solve the mystery of the death of Government Weapons Inspector Dr. David Kelly will be kept under wraps for up to 70 years. Why would we possibly say we've got democracy? We've been dragged into wars that were utterly contrived. Completely lied to. Whole nations were lied to over and over and over and over again, ad nauseum, if we can all remember it, by our government leaders, for geopolitical purposes and big finance. And we were told nothing of the truth. And by using that technique, well, they might have weapons of mass destruction, or they have them, they can invade anybody they wish to. So what did they do? When everybody comes up with vital evidence, they kill them. And then when the autopsy comes up, they put it under the Official Secrets Act. Nobody's to know the results for 70 years. Well, in 70 years, no one will care. And that is the world that you live in. And it happens in the US just the same. With orders and council and executive orders, all the same thing. No public input, nothing. No explanations to the public either. Why bother? And you know something is quite true. 87% of the public don't care what's going on at any particular time. They really don't. They really, really don't. There was a survey done in World War I by the big marketing companies. And it's one of the first big polls they did. It was to find out how people really thought about the war and getting into the war and involvement in the war and all the rest of it. And they really found that 87% of the public didn't really care what was happening. Really much about anything up there. It was Plato that said it thousands of years ago, that a public who doesn't watch government is under tyranny, or will be under tyranny. You're encouraged not to look into government. In fact, you're encouraged to feel that you're somehow alienated from it, and it's an autonomous thing that just runs above you. It's autonomous, it's like gravity, it just exists, you know. And you're trained now to believe that specialists somehow run the world to our advantage. You don't have to worry your little head. Go and play. Go and play and be happy. They've got all kinds of ways to make you happy. If you're not happy about things, go and get pills from a doctor and make you happy. As long as you're happy, that's all that matters. But whatever you do, don't get involved in what's going on. Whatever you do, don't do that. Apart from that, what can you do about it? Who are you? You're told this, you're felt to feel small and useless. But then again, think of the incredible show that's put on for you. This show of politics, this show of elections, this constant show of speaking to the people. It's a big show. They need you to believe in this. They need you because they need you to cooperate, don't they? How do you cooperate? By your compliance to everything that's done to you. That's how you cooperate. And we're cooperating into the grave. When Ronald Reagan was in, a commission came to him to talk about the project for long-range wars, future wars. And the reason that Ronald Reagan brought in Jean Kirkpatrick was she'd spoken to the American Jewish Congress it was, and it leaked out into a magazine. She was talking about the long-term projections for American policy, that they're going to have all these conflicts down the road with emerging nations or newly emerging nations and all their conflicts. And therefore it was more practical to put permanent bases across the world in advance, rather than going over to every war, setting up temporary bases and pulling them apart as you leave and going back home waiting for the next one. So Ronnie apparently got word of this, put her on his board of experts, and they worked out this project. At the same time, they're working out the Star Wars project for long-range wars. And guess what? All that time ago, they had the lists drawn up of the countries they'd probably have to go into for geopolitical and economic reasons. And you know that America they're building so many, these aren't just bases abroad. These are cities, permanent cities across the world. Trillions of dollars worth of cities. Where at one point, yeah, they're used by the military on the perimeter, but they have all these civilians and bureaucratic staffs in the center. And one day, these will be the super cities that the elite will gravitate to, surrounded by their protection, their gated communities, you might call it, of the future. All being set up because they've said themselves eventually, as this new system comes into being, the old system crumbles. As it crumbles, guess what? All those goons that you see have been trained through video games and movies that wear the black ninja outfits and the machine guns and the masked face, something like characters out of the Star Wars movies, not by coincidence, by the way, where they're all faceless. We'll be keeping you all in check as everything goes down and the depopulation begins, etc. Because they've said themselves, the future will be unsustainable. Now, it could definitely be sustainable, but they don't want it this way. They're using it as an excuse. They use the weather control, climate changes for excuse as well. Every excuse under the sun, or under the clouds, depending on your point of view, especially the ones they make, But anything will do to bring in this new world order society. And they use it to the maximum. Meanwhile, the existing cities in Canada, you've noticed, and in the US and in Europe are crumbling. They've said themselves it would cost more, on a survey done 2 years ago, it would cost maybe 10 to 20 times as much to repair, say for instance, the city of Toronto, to upgrade its infrastructure, the sewage systems, the lines under the city, all that stuff, than to build a new city. Well, again, that was discussed way back in the early 70s, when they talked about setting up these bases across the planet, where the elite certainly could live, as all the system back home is getting taken down.